Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I hope the audio still works all right and you can hear me. I would like to welcome you on the fourth webinar in the series of six within the ENTSO-E 2030 vision. The one today is entitled Energy System Integration and Offshore Wind Developments. My name is Dimitri Haniotis. I work for the French Transmission System Operator, RTE, and I'm also chairing the System Development Committee at ENTSO-E, which gives me the task to guide you through the webinar today. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, right. Just take the slide away and we go to the rules because we're expecting slightly more than 20 people in this webinar. So we have to introduce some housekeeping rules that you have been seeing for the last minutes in your screen. So for today's webinar, the video and audio is allowed only for speakers and panelists. And I would ask also the speakers or the panelists to switch their video on and their microphone on only when they're talking, and then switch it off when not. Now, as far as you, the audience, is concerned, you can place your questions only through Slido. The link, you have it in front of you, and probably you have it in the invitation. Do not use GoToWebinar. We're not looking there. If you want to help me out choosing the right questions, you have a like button that you can use in order to prioritize those questions that you feel they need answering. There is no dislike button, so don't hope for that. I know it's a bit difficult to follow the webinar at the same time doing it, but please do. It will help me out tremendously. Otherwise, I will have to choose the questions only for my friends, all three of them. More housekeeping rules. No, I think this is enough. I don't know where the slide went with the housekeeping rules. Yes, there it is. When you ask your questions, please put your name and institution if you want. And then in the end, we're going to select the best ones. The chat and raise the hand feature is not to be used today. So these are the rules. And we can move on to the agenda. So a couple of slides below. Yes, there it is. This is how we're going to spend the next 2 hours together. In our webinar, we're going to start with Gerald Kendler, the Vice Chair of the System Development Committee from Amprion, the German TSO, giving us, outlining for us the ENTSO-E views on system integration. Then our good colleague from the Commission, DGNR, Antonio Lopez Nicolas, will give us a state of affairs in the Commission in terms of energy system integration and hydrogen strategies. This session will be completed with Paul Wilczek from Eurelectric, Head of Distribution and Market Facilitation, again, giving the views of the distribution system operators on decentralization and system integration. This will end the first part of the webinar, and then we'll switch gears with two of my colleagues from ENTSO-E, Mrs. Antje Orts from Energinet and Willem Winter from 50 Hertz, talking us about the ENTSO-E views on offshore developments and offshore network technologies. And then we're happy also to welcome Mr. Gilles Dixon from Wind Europe, CEO of Wind Europe, talking about wind transport for offshore development. We will have hopefully ample time to have a Q&A based on the questions in the Slido, and then shorter than 15 minutes wrap up in the end by myself. For the speakers, I forgot to mention that please keep to the time allotted to you in the agenda. You see it in front of you, and probably you have seen it before. When you see my camera turning on and me doing funny faces, it means that you have less than 1 minute to conclude. Don't be scared, it's only that, but please keep to the time. So if we move on to the real business, as an introduction to this webinar, ENTSO-E has published its Vision 2030. Our main aim is to operate within a framework of policy initiatives. It's a bit unfair here to select only the EU 2030 targets and the clean energy package. There is a panoply of initiatives that constitute, let's say, the European strategy for reaching the 2050 targets, yet we have selected these two because we find it the most pertinent to our works. These policy initiatives give the framework for how the generation is going to move in Europe, how the consumers are going to be evolving in Europe, how much more they become responsive, new users, and what we call prosumers in the end. And then the bottom piece of the puzzle is the coupling to other sectors. You cannot anymore regard sectors individually. If you're looking for optimization, if you're looking for cost efficiency, you have to look for cross sectors. At the end, digitalization is a major enabler. Digitalization, innovation are major enablers for making this work. Our vision, what ENTSO-E has published as a 2030 vision, builds on the 2030 scenarios that we are publishing every 2 years, primarily for the TYNDP, but also to feed in such kind of works. Based on these scenarios, ENTSO-E is trying to pull together all the pieces and bits from around system operators, system operation, market design, creating a holistic picture how these things can work together towards closer integration of system operation and markets to have a robust and resilient system. So our vision by itself, we hope it is a robust and resilient expert-based vision that is adapted to a dynamic future and also to the policy context that we operate within. If we move on to the next slide, where it's the key drivers and major trends that we are identifying in this vision. What are the main things that we put our focus in the next years? Distributed flexibilities. What it means is that a lot of generation, a lot of activity from the consumers, a lot of storage, system flexibility, system services will be located in the distribution level, and that makes it more important than ever that TSOs and DSOs, transmission and distribution, closely work together. Power electronics is important because the nature of the system is changing. Renewables connected behind power electronics, HVDC links that are becoming more and more prevalent change the characteristics of the system, and therefore we need to introduce kind of a new thinking on the operation and the safety of the system. Markets and physics should be seamlessly integrated. That applied always, and it will always apply in order to create efficient markets. Then we have the offshore grids, the offshore developments. This will become a big piece of the puzzle in the future energy system. There is an enormous potential that has been identified, characterized, and now we're in the process of making this thing work. And this is part of the focus of our webinar today. The second part of our focus is energy system integration. I said it in the beginning, we have to look more further than the limits of our industry, of our power industry. We have to look at different sectors, always with the aim to maximize the services that one sector can provide to each other and make everything work together seamlessly. And then there are operational challenges that loom ahead in the future, the resilience of the system, how well we can forecast, how well we can automatize the operation, and the role of artificial intelligence within it. Going to the next slide, please. So this is what the vision of ENTSO-E sums up to. It's one system, a system of interconnected systems. So we have the TSOs, let's say the TSOs need to operate a system now that has strong interactions with the distribution. Of course, high voltage transmission is always in the center, complemented with offshore developments and further operational challenges, the threats to the system, what we need in terms of automation and decision support, and the forecasting, as I said before. My last slide in the opening, it shows a little bit how we get there, how we have to evolve our thinking and start seeing, let's say, more vertically and more horizontally. More vertically in terms of the local developments in the distribution levels, more horizontally, a more European approach, regional or even also European, based on the TSO to TSO cooperation. And of course, there is a third dimension that cannot fit there, which is the cross-sectorial approach. We have to talk about interoperability, how everything will work together, the role of system operators within it as key facilitators for making this thing work. We are the builders of this system and we are the operators of this system, so we have to make this thing work. The governance need to be looked upon quite carefully. Going to this new paradigm, governance should be more open, involving stakeholders, and always, last but not least, the consumers are in the heart of the energy transition, and we need to make sure that this thing operates as it should. So these are the opening remarks. I would now, without delay, go to the first presentation of the day, which is from Gerald Kendler, Vice Chair of the SDC Committee at ENTSO-E, and from Amprion. So welcome, Gerald. The audience is all yours.
Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the first presentation, and I would just like to outline our approach. You all know the objectives of the Green Deal, and I will talk about how ENTSO-E and TSOs can contribute towards achieving the objectives of the Green Deal. Number one is to integrate renewable energies. Number two, to use more electricity where it is efficient. Number three, to interlink the sectors. And our objective is always secure operation of the electricity system and future energy system. And I will talk to it from a planning perspective. Next, please. Now, electric energy has two great features. Feature number one, the use of electric energy is often very, very efficient. Here is a small example of an electric vehicle powered by a battery compared to a traditional diesel or petrol engine. And you see it is more efficient. And if you look at many processes, if you look at industrial processes, heating, and other appliances, you see that in many cases, electric processes are more efficient than processes used with traditional fuels. And this is where electricity really is important to achieve a higher efficiency, and efficiency is one big objective of the Green Deal. So this is the first great feature. The second great feature is on the next slide. We have an abundance of sources for electric energy. We have wind power, we have solar power, and here you see the figures that I took from other parties, and we'll probably hear more from Gilles later on about the 450 gigawatts of wind power offshore, and we have an abundance of green energy in the electric system. And so in 2050, wind and solar can be very, very important cornerstones of the energy system. Those are the two great features of the electric system. However, where there's light, there's also shadow. Next slide, please. The shadow is that the electric provided by wind and solar is not there when you need it, but it's there when you have wind and when you have sun. Here you have one of those curves that you probably know. It's wind and solar generation in Germany about the same time 1 year ago. And there you can see that some days we had lots and lots of renewable energy, and some days we had hardly any. And the big downfall of the electric system, it's a very sensitive real-time system, and we do not have that much flexibility in that system. It is still sufficient for today because today the system works. But if you look at the RES figures we are going to see in 2030, 2040 and beyond, the electric system will not have sufficient flexibility. And this is where the other sectors come in, because the other sectors have exactly excellent features in that regard. They have flexibility, they have storage capacities, all things that the electricity sector is lacking in the regard needed in the future. Next slide, please. And this is here a synthetic year of 2040 from one of the TYNDP scenarios. And what you can see in this slide is there where you have blue and green. This is the RES produced. So the blue is the RES that can be directly produced in the electric system. And the green energy is the power that you cannot integrate at the system. And where you see this gray, where blue is lower than the gray, that is the energy that is missing because we don't have sufficient generation from RES. And what our aim must be is to make this energy that is here green, that cannot be integrated into an electric system, we must make that available for the other system. And here we need in the future a one system view on all systems, so we can combine the good features, or as Dimitri just said it, we can maximize the services that sectors can provide to make one good and efficient system on the road to decarbonization. So making this energy is available is part number one, and part number two is next slide, yes, is we need infrastructure to do this. And here we show two different options how infrastructure could look like in the future. What we have windmills, for example, here in the north, and then we have customers that you see in this little icon of a production plant, and then you have to get the energy there somewhere. And there are two options. Option number one in this left circle is we have the electrolyzer. This is this new symbol that you see there, and you convert the electric energy to H2. And this hydrogen is maybe transported in a converted methane pipeline via future possible hydrogen network. Option number two is to transport the electricity through a transmission line and then use the electricity right where the customers maybe built an electrolyzer there. And there you can see two different options. As you can see, the infrastructure needs in both cases are very different and costs are very different as well. And I think what is important here is that the planning, the placement of electrolyzers, so where do we have the infeed of renewables? This is given more or less by nature. And where do we use it? This is given where we live and where we produce, and how to transport it there. This is the infrastructure, and this has been optimized between the future integrated sectors. Next one, please. And this is where our roadmap for multi-sectoral planning support comes in. As Dimitri said, greater coordination of the different sectors is very important. First, as from a system development perspective, of the infrastructure planning needed, but secondly, also of the operation, so that we can have a new system with very low carbon emissions. And the other point Dimitri mentioned is key. It's increased stakeholder collaboration. We have to open up to many more stakeholders. We have to talk to more stakeholders than we did in the past. And we have to learn more from each other. We have to learn from you what are the main features of your systems. And we already did a lot lately, and it was a very interesting experience. And altogether, we have to achieve a one energy system view. The big downside of this, again, is this makes planning and operating much more complex. And we believe we have to deal with this complexity. And the way we propose in this roadmap is to do a multi-sectoral scenario building, because with scenarios, it is still possible to look at the different sectors together and then to see what demand are we going to have, what generation are we going to have, and then build common scenarios that could be pictures of the future. But then the planning itself, we believe, to reduce complexity should be more sector specific based on the scenario. So the infrastructure planning, like the TYNDPs, gas, electricity, should be more sector specific. However, when we have those results, we have to look, are there any any ideas, any planning ideas where we see that we would be better off if those two sectors interact, or if sectors interact. And there we see that we have to make a multi-sector cost-benefit analysis to see which infrastructure would fit best. And this new process is our proposal to implement this in the future. And from our perspective, this would really help decarbonization. It would increase efficiency not only in the use of energy, but also in building the necessary infrastructure. Next one. And to sum up, the variable RES will significantly help to decarbonize the future system. And together with the flexibility of other sectors, we can believe we can do it in a very cost-efficient way. And there we need a multi-sectorial planning system. And when we have the electrified and the flexible sectors looked at together with the electric sector, then we think we can have a very, very sound system, which will at the end achieve security of supply, and in 2050, hopefully a fully decarbonized climate neutral system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald. No one has ever put so much effort not to see my face. So you finished right on time. Thank you. It was a very well articulated the work of the past months of a very highly complex issue that we're dealing with. And I think it was quite a very nice presentation of where the thinking of ENTSO-E is. Now, the second speaker in line is Mr. Antonio Lopez Nicolas from the Commission, Deputy Head of Unit Renewables and CCS Policy. I don't know if Nicolas, are you connected? Maybe with some issues, but myself, I cannot hear you very well. No. If it is not the case, maybe we can switch the order of the presentations. So I will call Paul Wilczek from Euroelectric, if possible. Paul, can you switch on your microphone and camera? Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, hello, okay. Good afternoon.
The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes to present the DSO view on decentralization and system integration.
All right, thank you very much, Dimitri. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Paul Wilczek from Euroelectric, and I would like to give you a bit of outline on the DSO views here on decentralization and system integration. First, maybe as a bit of a scene setting, and also I very much agree with what Mr. Kendler just said. Renewables, variable renewables will be the key in a fully decentralized power supply by 2050. I think one big difference that we see now in comparison to maybe say 10 years ago is that it's really going to be variable renewables, solar and wind. I think 10 years ago maybe we were looking at more synchronous generation that could be renewable, but no, it's really variable generation. So they will be a key feature, and here I'm alluding to the decarbonization pathway study that we have done at Euroelectric. In all the scenarios, be it 80, 90, or 95 of decarbonization levels by 2050, they really play a main role. Up to 80% of that electricity will come from renewable sources here. And they're in particular variable renewables. Next slide, please. And here comes maybe a bit of the distribution level dimension. And by 2030 already, we see that about half of our power generation fleet will be connected at distribution grid level and decentralized, because it's going to be solar PV as well as onshore grid, of which virtually all of it is low to mid voltage level. This is really something that we looked at. Here you see the graph in absolute terms. whereas offshore wind, of course, is mainly connected at distribution grid level. Some of the other RES, of course, is here and there, both at distribution and transmission grid level. But here we look at really the bulk, solar and onshore wind. Really half of that generation fleet will be already at the distribution grid level by 2030. Next slide, please. And now looking at really the topic, sector integration, what does it mean? When we look beyond now electricity, and here you see the various other main sectors that we decided to look a bit deeper in the decarbonization pathway study: transport, buildings, industry. A lot of this will be electric, no doubt, because of the efficiency gains, the efficiency win situation that you see out of electricity, as Mr. Kendler already explained. In transport, we see a 40 times increase of electric vehicles by 2030. This is really an option or a plausible scenario up to 2030 already. In buildings also, coming from a very low direct electrification rate of about 22% in total for transport, buildings and industry right now, this can also increase quite a lot, up to 63%, mainly due to heat pumps. Heat pump rollouts, and last but not least, because of industry, of course, investment in new industrial processes, steel, chemicals. A lot of research and also a lot of practical projects are being rolled out here to find direct electrification solutions. Of course, there are hard to abate sectors, hard to abate technologies for which electricity will probably be not a solution, and for which hydrogen will be key. Of course, this is important, but here you see 2050, 60% of an electrification rate compared to today is something that we see as plausible, as a plausible outcome, as a plausible scenario when we are looking at a full decarbonization of the power sector. And it's decentralized. That's also probably very important to mention. Virtually all of the transport infrastructure will be connected at low voltage grid level. The same goes for buildings. We'll see about industry, but a lot of this will need to be facilitated at distribution grid level with quite a lot of investments in infrastructure at the end of the day. And I will come to that in a second. Next slide, please. Here we go now a bit deeper into the consequences for what it means for distribution system operators. It's probably not news that we cannot connect and reinforce anymore. Sector integration is about an integrated set of solutions. I talked about the renewables. I talked about the EVs that you see. Electrification will add an additional load level increase per year. And we can here debate, of course, about the exact figure, but our estimations is a bit over 2% per year. We need new grid, and that, of course, will apply also to distribution grid level to meet this new peak demand, as well as, of course, continuous investments to replace existing assets. This is still a bulk of investment needs. There's, I think, no doubt about it. And another investment category is, of course, due to the greater visibility, monitoring, and control of electricity flow needs across our grids at all voltage levels. Here I'm quoting 60 billion per year as an investment need. That's an estimation by the European Commission, by one of the impact assessments there. Antonio probably knows more about it, how this figure came about. Just to say that we at Euroelectric and together with our colleagues at ENTSO are looking in a dedicated study now about what the investment needs at distribution grid level are really going to be per year, and triggered by what are the main investment drivers: renewables, EV, resilience, digitalization, and we would like to publish this by the end of the year. So please stand by for this distribution grid investment needs study. So unfortunately, I don't have the results yet here. Next slide, please. This, of course, is not only about investment triggers or investment needs. It's about also a new role which we labeled as from pipes to platforms. The role of DSOs, not only of TSOs, of course, increases now in size and complexity due to the ever-increasing renewables uptake and the ongoing electrification trends and transport. Here you see in the first box the key roles of DSOs so far. Probably not very surprising. We are connecting all the consumers, all the customers that knock on our door and like to be connected. We operate our grids. We plan, build, and optimize the distribution grids. We provide, we support system stability. But then in the future, we will need to plan and connect for all the EV charging infrastructure. So all the corresponding grid reinforcement needs need to be properly planned for. So what is ultra fast charging infrastructure corridors really going to mean for the distribution grid? Where does it need to be reinforced, by when and how? So here you're looking at a famous chicken and egg problem, if you want, for planning. How fast will the EV rollout really be, and what sort of consequences will it have on the distribution grid? We will integrate more and more of local storage facilities. That's already a reality in many distribution grids today. We will unlock flexibilities. That's probably a big topic, and you already mentioned it, Dimitri, and also Mr. Kendler. And we'll be more and more involved because there will be more and more smart meters in data management activities. So the role of DSOs is really changing quite dramatically. And next slide, please. Yes. This is another aspect of sector integration. It's system integration. And here I'm going away from the aspects of electricity versus other energy carriers. This is about distribution with generation and TSOs. We need more cooperation. This is only going to work if we cooperate more closely in network planning. There are, of course, legislative requirements that we will need to respect. These are laid out in the clean energy package. We need to cooperate closer in network planning so we know what is needed when and how much of it. There are some regulatory requirements that are in the directive. They need to be really spelled out a bit more in detail, I would say, how this will look really at national level and exchange best practices on this. I think we are keen to cooperate with our TSO colleagues on this. We have already had some very good cooperation projects. The active system management report, for example, some of you might remember. But yeah, looking forward to be more deeply involved in this. The 10Y NDP is a recurring product that you have. We need to address this ever-increasing figures of RES, but also the increasing digitalization trends, the increasing needs of our customers at the end of the day, because they will make these choices: how fast and how many EVs will be on the road, how many electric heat pumps will be actually installed in buildings. So we will need to keep a close eye on that. But last but not least, and just to conclude here, it's not all positive in terms of investments and the success stories for investments. It's not so easy, and we are often looking at countries with a lot of RES, with a lot of innovative solutions, but we are 27 member states, and in many of those, the investment incentives are actually much lower than a decade ago. So here we need to look at, and here I'm looking really at new member states, at Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, a lot of member states in crisis and economic crisis, where it's all about cost saving and where investments are difficult to achieve, and it's all about just maintaining levels of security of supply rather than integration of renewables and innovative solutions. So let's not forget about those parts of Europe as well here. I will stop here right now, and happy to take your questions.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. And good thing you reminded. Please register your questions at the Slido application so that we can take them all together in the end, in the slot that we have allotted for this. So very, very interesting highlights that you shared with us. Thank you very much. And I like the fact that you highlighted the ongoing efforts. There are ongoing efforts of really enhancing the cooperation between system operators in the transmission and distribution level. Now, I will go back, therefore, in the agenda to the presentation from Antonio from the Commission. Antonio, I don't know if you have a camera or you're just participating by audio.
Hi, Dimitri, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you quite well.
Okay, now at least I've managed half of the issue, which is to speak. I don't think I have the option to connect a camera. I mean, I'm connecting with my iPhone, and I don't see how I can unblock that. So unless you can do it,
then,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Please go ahead for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri, and thanks, ENTSO-E, for the invitation and for your work on this very timely and important issue. I think you've made my life together with your electric a bit easier, so I should be a bit quicker in presenting the elements of the two strategies that we released in July. Those are two key strategies for achieving climate neutrality and building an energy system fit for decarbonization. So in this first slide, you see, I mean, how the energy system is evolving, and on the left-hand side, how demand, which is at the very center of the energy system integration thinking, is evolving with, for example, I mean, the transport sector and the residential sector been seeing their demand decrease by 35 and 40%, partly thanks to the more efficient electrification processes compared to the use of fossil fuels. On the supply side, on the right-hand side of the slide, we see that the most dramatic change comes from renewables that will become in 2050 like 2.5 times of what we have currently in the system, at least. Next slide, please. So if we look at how energy carriers are evolving from now till 2050, we see that electrification and electricity will become the biggest energy carrier in 2050, changing from the current 1/4 of the final energy consumption to half of the final energy consumption. We see that electrification will replace the use of liquids significantly with an 87% reduction. And we also see that there is a major decrease in overall consumption by 36% in 2050 compared to current figures. Next slide, please. If we look now at the power sector, we see, and this comes from the climate target plan released in last September, we see how the power system is evolving for 2030 and for 2050, reaching 38 to 40% renewables already in 2030 and being fully decarbonized by 2050. And this is a common trend in all scenarios of the climate target plan. Next slide, please. So next slide, yeah. So if we see what's happening with the gas sector, we see that there is a slight decrease of demand of gaseous fuels compared to today's figures, but at the same time there is a radical change on what these gaseous fuels are, and we see a major shift from natural gas to renewable and low carbon gases, including biogas, but also renewable hydrogen and synthetic gases produced from hydrogen, mostly to be used in the hard to decarbonize sectors. Next slide, please. Yeah, one more. Yeah, so with that in mind, I mean, we came up with the energy system integration strategy. Why we did that? Because it's necessary to reach climate neutrality in the context of the European Green Deal, but it's necessary to do it at the lowest possible cost for consumers, citizens, and industries. So it's about cost-effective decarbonization. And the energy system is 75% of the total emissions. And we see that decarbonization is progressing at very different speeds across the different sectors and across the different end users. But this is not only about climate neutrality, it's also about many other Green Deal objectives, such as security of supply, jobs and growth, industrial leadership, and including new global opportunities for our EU companies. This is especially important in the context of the current recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, where energy system integration and energy priorities at large are a key element in Commission's recovery and EU recovery agenda in the area of climate and energy. Why now? Because at the end of the day, the investments made in the energy sector follow long cycles. So what we put in the system in the next few years will still be there in 20, 30, and even 40 years time. Next slide, please. So what's energy system integration? Basically, is moving from the system on the left to the system on the right, from system made by vertical value chains for each sector, separated from each other and with very little interactions, to a much more interlinked system where the different energy carriers and the different sectors and use sectors interact with each other through more complex and multi-directional flows, allowing to achieve decarbonization at the lowest possible cost. Next slide, please. So the strategy is built around three main principles: a more circular and energy efficient energy system, where we can reduce consumption across the energy system, not only final energy consumption, but we can be more efficient, where we can use waste streams in the best possible way, for example, waste heat from data centers in district heating and cooling networks. Second important element is a power system largely based on renewables, fully decarbonized, with a deep electrification of consumption, where we can, for example, easily electrify heating will increase substantially. There will be a need for renewable and low carbon fuels, including hydrogen for the hard to decarbonize sectors, mostly transport and industry. And if we want to have the amount of these renewable and low carbon fuels, we need to decarbonize those sectors. We need to create the conditions to promote them and to allow them to be a viable solution for decarbonization. With this in mind, we also came with the hydrogen strategy at the same time than energy system integration. This came as a spin-off of the energy system integration strategy, going a bit more into details of the vision and actions related to hydrogen and trying to turn hydrogen into a viable solution for climate neutrality. Finally, the third element of what we adopted on the 8th of July is the so-called Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which creates a structure together with industry, stakeholders, and policymakers to try to build a robust project pipeline that can deliver on the ambitious goals for hydrogen in the two strategies. Next slide, please. So the energy system integration strategy comes up with a number of actions across the three main pillars of the strategy and three transversal enablers that are equally important: markets, infrastructure, and digitalization. This contains many of the things that the Commission will be doing in the next 3 to 4 years to deliver on an integrated energy system and on the field of energy. I won't go into the details, but you see many actions touching on legislation on the energy side, such as the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, the 10E regulation, or the review of the gas legislation, but also legislation from the transport side, climate, taxation, competition, which is equally important to deliver on this integrated vision. Next slide, please. So finally, on hydrogen, which is the second strategy, two main elements that are relevant for the discussion is, which type of hydrogen are we supporting with the EU strategy, and which type of end users we feel that hydrogen should play a key role on. On the first question, the strategy established a clear priority for renewable hydrogen as the most compatible option with climate neutrality and with the Green Deal objectives. It also established the possibility for low carbon hydrogen to play an important role in the transition. Low carbon hydrogen coming from natural gas with carbon capture and storage, and also low carbon hydrogen coming from electricity, from non-renewable electricity. On the end users question, and this is extremely important, we speak about two main lead markets. First, industry to replace existing hydrogen production, for example, in the chemical, fertilizers, and refinery sector, but also the steel sector, for example, and also the second, the transport sector, the maritime and aviation sectors, which are really difficult to decarbonize, but also heavy duty road vehicles and parts of the rail network that are not that easy to electrify. So, concluding on the two strategies, I think these two strategies, try to look at the energy system holistically and create the conditions to achieve climate neutrality. As I said before, they put the power system even more at the forefront of decarbonization, being the sector which is quicker to decarbonize. This makes, the challenges and opportunities that the power system face even more prominent. We will have to face and undertake a massive increase of renewable electricity, and this is a major opportunity for the EU, but at the same time a challenge to get investments done and to integrate the renewable energy into the grid and to solve public acceptance issues. There is also a massive trend towards more electrification of the other sectors, both by a direct electrification, but also through the production of renewable hydrogen and synthetic fuels. And of course, this is extremely important to tackle in the right way through the right tools and making best possible use of digitalization, integrated infrastructure, and integrated markets. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And if I understand correctly, you may not be able to follow the webinar until the end or the Q&A section. We'll see by that time. This should not prevent me from asking you to still use Slido. I think there's quite a lot of activity there, and please register your questions. Now it's time to switch gears a little bit. Not much, I hope, but according to the agenda, now we move to the offshore developments. I would like to welcome and ask Ange to appear on the camera. There you are. So welcome, Ange. Ange is a convener of our core group on offshore development, a member of the System Development Committee, and she's from Energinet. So she's going to talk to us about ENTSO-E's views on offshore developments. So Ange, the audience is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. So I hope I won't see you in the next 10 minutes. Let's see if it succeeds. So yeah, my name is Antje Orts. I work for the Danish TSO Energinet, and as you heard, I lead this group. Yeah, you also heard from Paul that we will have complete remake of the European electricity production portfolio. So we'll see nuclear phase outs, coal phase outs, less gas at some point, and a huge increase of renewable energy sources. And here we will especially see an extra huge increase of offshore wind. So offshore renewables, which is mainly wind. So this will of course impact the flows across Europe, and so this might help to understand that offshore is just one out of multiple aspects for us TSOs when planning the grid. So what is needed from our side is the application of a holistic view across time, space, and sectors. Next slide. Yeah, when we plan, we just a second. Yeah. So when we plan, we apply this method quite naturally. So, and we have the opportunity or the advantage that we already, when planning, we do consider the operation of the assets. So that's our strength as we operate the system from Finland down to Portugal. So this is all one big system. So that's also why I put the European map from the last TYNDP or the upcoming TYNDP on the screen, where you can see all the projects which have been submitted into the plan. And if you imagine big generators in the waters, then you can imagine that also countries, even without a coast, will sooner or later get the energy from offshore generation, either as electricity or as molecules. Next. So talking about numbers, only thinking about the northern seas as example region, last year the ministers agreed to integrate 70 gigawatt of offshore wind, which is 3.5 times as much as we have today. So today we have around 20. And so this means that we need extremely to accelerate our activities, as the first windmill which was put into the water was 1991. So we had 30 years for the first 20 gigawatts, and we have a bit less for the next 50 gigawatts. Next. And you can also see the Wind Europe figures, which you, I assume you know. So there until 2050, 450 gigawatt is expected for the all European waters. And if you read both publications of ENTSO-E and of Wind Europe, you will see differences. That's why Wind Europe allocates the wind according to sea basins, while in ENTSO-E we think about where all this will be connected. So the figures will differ, but we talk actually about the same 450 gigawatts, just to explain some differences. Next. In May, we published the first position paper on offshore development, and this is all in one slide. So the key challenges are, of course, that we will see massive investment for generation and transmission on and offshore. So financial security needs to be ensured so that we don't have stranded investments. All this needs space. So we also should do some proper spatial planning because space will become scarce at some point, and there are multiple users, of course, of the waters. System balancing with this massive share of variable risks, we will see high ramps, and this will need more advanced flexibility products. You have heard about flexibility already earlier, and all the different sectors can also contribute to this. So we might see new market products at some point. System security should, of course, not be compromised, and neither should environmental protection and public acceptance. Next. Who does what? So here is what we think are the basic pillars and needs. And TSO responsibility, we see, we are responsible to do the planning and also to ensure the timely development. Currently, we would need some more information about what is expected offshore by when, so in order to be able to do proper offshore planning as well. But we are prepared to do that. And second point is modular and stepwise development is expected. We do already publish regularly the 10-year network development plan, and this is based on consistent planning methods, and so we could expand this to the offshore field. Interoperability, you will hear directly afterwards something about that, so I skip this. And of course, the energy bills and environmental footprint should be kept as low as possible. So what is expected next from Commission and governments? This is a future-proof regulatory framework. And so sometimes it's good also to appreciate something what already exists. So the consistent unbundling rules which are applied onshore should also be applied offshore. So we don't see any reason to shift the rules just because we are offshore. Then forward-looking investments, anticipatory investment might be necessary as the lead times for offshore generation and for infrastructure is different. So governments then also should ensure confidence in market and system operation setups, meaning that it's not a good idea every 5 years to shift the rules because higher risk means higher cost for everybody. So it's good that once decided, the rules keep stable for quite some time. And hybrid projects are actually in the next slides. Next. Yeah, here now we go into the topic of market design. So we investigated this recently, and you will, I hope, already this week, you will be able to read our next publication with focus on market design. So we found these 3 perspectives from which we can look at the market design, and all are important as all will influence the result. So, and all have the target to create social welfare. So with market efficiency, we mean that price formation needs to reflect true cost, and the market outcomes should reflect physical flows. And this is important both to ensure the long-term and the short-term developments. System operation efficiency, this addresses the incentive for consumption and generation to have a balanced position and to provide flexibility to the market to the extent that is needed. And of course, the alignment with policy objective is to fulfill the policy objectives, and policymakers might intervene with regulation and mechanisms that may affect markets and competition in case there is some imperfect situation. Next. You have seen these pictures before, so we distinguish between different concepts, and the first 3, they have one purpose only. This is either connecting markets or connecting offshore generation. And number 4 and 5, they have dual purpose. So this is both connecting markets and connecting offshore generation. So this, of course, changes completely the situation because now we have a new reality, both physically and market-wise. So the cable capacity has to be shared, and there will be congestions. And so more cooperation is needed to integrate the offshore wind. Next. We investigated both concepts according to the 3 perspectives. So on the one hand, we have the offshore bidding zone design. This is the upper picture. There you can see that a separate bidding zone is formed containing only offshore generation, if available consumption as well. And the grid connections are interconnectors. So then the offshore wind farm will receive the price of the non-congested area. So usually electricity goes from the low price to the high price. And this means the non-congested area is usually the low price area. This means that the offshore wind farm, as a rule, will receive the low price, which is also the issue, which is a bit difficult for this concept, as it might be more attractive for offshore wind farms to wish to be regularly connected. Oh no, you're too early. And now I lost track. Yeah, so some subsidies might be necessary. The home market design is the market is part of a specific bidding zone, and the import capacity is calculated by the TSOs based on the transmission capacity. So the transmission capacity actually is reduced. The offshore wind farm receives always the price of the home market, which can be the low or the high price, depending on the direction. Next. Comparing from a system operational perspective, you can see that the offshore bidding zone is the grid constraints are fully considered. This is not the case for the home market. Imbalances are not an issue for the offshore bidding zone design, but there might be situations for the home market design where this is a problem, namely when we have positive imbalances, there's more need for redispatch and counter trading. And yeah, the imbalance settlement reflects the true balancing costs for the offshore bidding zone. This is different for the home market. There might be additional costs because nothing is for free, and so this might for society result in higher costs. Next. So this was something about the bottom left box, the top box. There we also have some criteria. Maybe one important criterion is the third bullet point, the compliance to the 70% requirement of the clean energy package. This is a problem for the home market design, as this is not compatible due to the unconstrained access for the offshore wind farm to the one market always. And competition, to name another one, competition is also different. It's there's perfect competition in the offshore bidding zone concept and not so good competition due to the unconstrained access for the home market design. So policymakers need to consider all of this. Our conclusions so far are that the offshore bidding zone concept appears to be the preferred solution when considering our triangle, and as it mainly better reflects physical congestions and physical flows. And the offshore, but with this tear in our eyes, is that there's less market revenues for offshore wind farms. So there must be some compensation for this to trigger building hybrid projects. Yeah, we will publish the results of what I just said, hopefully this week. And this is just some advertisement for publications we already have. So yeah, you can click country 3 times. So these are the main messages, mainly linking today's ENTSO-E messages. But I think I will stop here and leave you to the third publication, which also goes to interoperability. And then the next speaker, Willy, will go into details. Thank you.
Yes, so let's move directly to Willem. Thank you so much, Ange. So Willem, can you come? Great. So Willem Winter, convener of the working group Security and System Operation of Tomorrow in our Research and Development Committee. So Willem, the audience is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dimitri. So I will start and I will talk about opportunities and challenges enabling offshore wind integration, so large-scale offshore wind integration. And this slide is there's a lot of information, but I will concentrate on 3 steps. The first of it, in the short term, we can see the strong need of standardization of models and interfaces, and in the midterm, one of the main issues is to solve the interoperability issues, coping with the different technologies or technologies from different vendors, building large multi-terminal grids which are needed for enabling the large-scale offshore wind energy. What you see is also flagship 4, and it's a part of the new ENTSO-E roadmap for research and innovation. So within the next 5 to 10 years, a full-size multi-vendor, multi-terminal, multi-purpose demonstrator shall be established. But this is a really big challenge, but we have to do this and we have to cope with this challenge to bring the offshore wind energy integration forward, but also the entire, let's say, rebuilding of the energy system. Next slide, please. Now, the next slide shows where we are, where we are going. So Antje showed this already a bit. Yeah. So what we have today is more or less point-to-point connections. Then we have interconnectors to offshore, and it's also planned to have discrete plug wind interconnector. Then what also was already shown. And then in the new developments will be maybe first multi-terminal, larger multi-terminal offshore systems. So, but one is key, the HVDC grids can only grow at the required pace if interoperability is not an implementation risk for the TSOs. Next slide. So next slide shows some technical aspects on the technological interoperability. So this means operation compatibility of different technologies, and also assuring of correct operation of different technology. This is really important, and in addition to that, the vendor interoperability. So that means the operation of the same technology of different vendors may be in one DC system, but also the interoperability of the technology of different HVDC vendors, for example, at the AC connection point, if you have additional, let's say, HVDC systems in one substation. So this is really important that we cope with these challenges and to bring this forward. One example is if we have, for example, these interaction side, there's also a link to the connection codes. So if interaction side is to do that, to have to ensure this interoperability, then you need the tools for that, you need the models for that. And finally, you have to demonstrate and to de-risk before you go in such systems in advance. And this is really important. Next slide. So these are the opportunities and challenges in a short summary. So the interoperability remains the enabler for HVDC multi-terminal development. There are some technical issues to be solved, the standardization issues. And she has been working the last years on that, all together with Team Europe, to solve these issues. Some steps are done already, a lot of steps are in advance. So modeling requirements, for example, then demonstration in target environment and functional operational requirements we also need for these DC grids, maybe also DC grid code, whatever. So protection of multi-terminal HVDC is an issue, it's a main issue in the revision of the planning approaches. So there are also some non-technical issues we have to cover and to cope with. One is the ownership, then the procurement and the warranties and the regulation. This was it in short, Dimitri. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Willem. And of course, technology cannot do it alone, but we cannot do it without technology. And I think that was quite a nice illustration of what we need to work in the future. Now I will ask Gilles Dixon, CEO of Wind Europe, to join us. Thank you, Gilles. And you will conclude, let's say, the presentations with a 10-minute introduction on Wind Europe's views. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Dimitros. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you have my slides. There they are. Thank you very much indeed. I want to begin by just showing you how offshore wind is going to grow in Europe over the next 10 years. On the left-hand side, that is where we are today in terms of gigawatts of capacity installed. On the right, that's where we will be by 2030. This is color-coded by country. You can see that the UK in dark blue and Germany in light blue are the two leading countries. But you can also see that offshore wind is growing in other countries too, including France in red, Poland in black. And the grey at the top is quite interesting. There are lots of other countries that are going to be building offshore wind farms for the first time in the next 10 years. Among them, Poland, Ireland, Norway, Spain, Lithuania, Greece. So offshore wind is becoming an all-Europe affair. Now, I noted, Antje, that ENTSO-E scenarios assume 70 gigawatts in the North Sea and Irish Sea by 2030. Your map excludes the Baltic, the Mediterranean, and the Southern Atlantic. Even so, your 70 gigawatts may be a somewhat conservative estimate. You can see here that we're looking at 110 gigawatts by 2030 in Europe as a whole. And that is based on the commitments that governments have made in their national energy and climate plans, or other commitments that non-EU governments have made. For example, the UK clearly committing to 40 gigawatts by 2030. Now, this is the growth in offshore wind. It's worth just pausing to note that onshore wind is growing by even more over the next 10 years and by even more over the next 30 years. Let's have a look at the next slide. Look at the light blue, first of all. Next, here we are, the light blue, the 23 gigawatts we have today, rising to 111 and then 450. But look at the dark blue, that is onshore wind capacity in Europe. It's rising by even more than offshore wind in terms of gigawatts of installed capacity. Wind is already 15% of all of the electricity that we consume in Europe, according to the Commission's decarbonisation scenarios and according to the IEA, and as Paul showed us earlier, according to Euroelectric, wind will be 50% of all of the electricity we consume in Europe by 2050. Now, where exactly are Europe's offshore wind farms today? Next. The blue are the existing offshore wind farms. The green are those currently being built. The yellow are those currently being developed. That's where they are today. Now, all of the blue dots that you see are wind farms with a simple point-to-point grid connection back to the mother country. We don't yet have any hybrid offshore wind farms. That is going to change, and that needs to change. And it needs to change for the following simple reasons. Hybrid offshore wind farms save money because they allow us to pool our generation and our transmission assets. They also save space in the sea, because when we pool the generation assets, we won't actually have to build so many offshore wind farms in order to have a fully functioning decarbonised European electricity system. The 450 gigawatts of offshore wind that the EU is targeting for 2050 will take up 3% of Europe's sea space. 3%, not insignificant. So the more we can minimize the space through hybrid projects, the better. There's of course a third good reason for doing hybrid projects, as others have said, which is that they help to improve the flows and liquidity of electricity in Europe's energy system, more energy flows between countries. Wind Europe believe that out of 450 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, hybrid projects can and should account for up to 150 gigawatts. So 1/3 of our offshore wind by 2050 should be hybrid projects. Now, what exactly are these hybrid projects going to look like? Wilhelm and Antje have already talked about this. I will show you some more diagrams in the next slide. The first model is what you might call the Kriegers Flak model. Yes, so you have, if we can just focus on the first model for the time being, thank you. The first model, Kriegers Flak, you have two countries involved. In the case of Kriegers Flak, country A is Denmark, country B is Germany. The two Kriegers Flak wind farms are actually next door to each other, either side of the sea border, and there's a cable between them, and of course they both have cables back to the mother country. That's the simple Kriegers Flak model. Then we have a second model, thank you, which is a bit more sophisticated. Here you have an offshore wind farm in country A's EEZ, which is not in fact connected to country A, but only to country B and via a hub in country B's EEZ. Next. Here you may have offshore wind farms that are plugging in to an interconnector. Next. Here you have a central hub. Here it's located on the border of two countries, EEZs. This could even be a platform or an artificial island or even a natural highland. And you would probably have AC connections from those outlying offshore wind farms and then DC connections from the hub back to the two countries concerned. And finally, Next. You might even have an offshore wind farm in one country which has only one connection, but it's not back to the mother country, it's to another country. We would still define that technically as a hybrid project. Okay, let us look and see what is actually happening out there today. What hybrid projects are being developed and planned? First of all, next, we have Kriegers Flak. There it is. Stop, stop, thank you, stop. If we just take them one at a time, please. Thank you. So you have Kriegers Flak. So far, it's a connection to Denmark and Germany. There is a plan to build a connection to Sweden as well. And then the red, this is a project that TenneT are developing with Vattenfall to connect the IJmuiden offshore wind farm in Dutch waters to the East Anglia wind farm off the coast of England. And the plan is to build a cable between the two. Next. You have discussions going on between the governments and TSOs of Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands about various clusters. We don't portray it here, but these clusters may have some connection to the Cobra interconnector between Denmark and the Netherlands. These diagrams here are purely indicative and illustrative. Next. There are discussions, in fact, there's an MOU signed between the governments of Estonia and Latvia. They want to build a 1,000 megawatt offshore wind farm in the Baltic. It would have a cable to each of the countries concerned. Next. Denmark and Poland are talking about developing a hybrid offshore wind farm around the island of Bornholm. There would be offshore wind farms connecting into Bornholm. You'd have substations there, and possibly electrolyzers as well. And then the transmission of not just electricity, but possibly also renewable hydrogen to Denmark and to Poland. And next, then we have the Dogger Bank, which is here in the middle of the North Sea. It's currently being developed. It's 4 gigawatts of new offshore wind capacity. It will be operating by the middle of this decade, if not before. The Dogger Bank is in many ways the jewel in everybody's crown when they think about hybrid offshore wind farms in the North Sea. Fantastic wind resource and a shallow seabed. You could build 50 gigawatts of offshore wind farms there, and it's right on the point where the EEZs come together of Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and the UK. You will notice here that we have connected in, and again, this is purely illustrative, an offshore wind farm in Norwegian waters. So Norway is developing 2 zones for floating, large floating offshore wind farms. They have deeper waters. Their plan is to export the electricity from those floating offshore wind farms into the emerging North Sea grid infrastructure. Now, as I say, this is purely indicative. Sorry, we've actually drawn in here a connection between Dogger Bank and the Danish Dutch-German cluster. There are, of course, other projects that are currently being planned. The Danish government wants to build 2 further islands, an additional one in the North Sea and one more in the Baltic. And there are many other plans currently being discussed by governments, by TSOs, by wind farm developers. But what you can see here is it's a bit of a patchwork and a piecemeal picture that is emerging. We don't have a very neat meshed North Sea offshore grid. We might in due course, but that's not really how these projects are developing today. It's more piecemeal. It is more bottom up. Just a couple of concluding remarks. We agree with what ENTSO-E have said about standalone offshore bidding zones probably being the way forward for these hybrid offshore wind farms. As Antje has acknowledged, that then compromises the revenue base of the wind farms themselves, and that needs to be compensated somehow. And the wind industry believe that the best way of compensating that probably is a redistribution of congestion revenues. Of course, that may require changes to EU regulation. And we look to the European Commission to give us some clarity on that in their forthcoming offshore renewable energy strategy. If there is to be a change in regulation, then clearly it's important that some legal clarity is provided in the short term for these sort of hybrid offshore wind farms that already want to go ahead. These projects do not want to wait 4 or 5 years while we wait and see what the EU co-legislators come up with in terms of any amendment to the electricity regulation, which might deliver the redistribution of congestion revenues. Finally, we fully support the work that ENTSO-E and T&D Europe are doing on interoperability, and we're very grateful to the European Commission for the very constructive approach that they are taking to this in respect of Horizon Europe. We do have this problem that the 3 companies that manufacture HVDC equipment and platforms, their technology is not interoperable today. It needs to be made interoperable, because if you look at these projects, you will have multi-vendor, multi-terminal platforms with 2 or more of the 3 different technologies being applied in a single project. So they need to be interoperable, and we're grateful to the Commission for helping us to try and find ways of delivering that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gilles. Excellent presentation as always. I noted 2 things that I liked. Offshore is an all Europe affair. I think this is something important that we all have to keep in mind. We're always focusing in the north, but as you say, there is potential all around Europe. And the second one is your impression that it is a patchwork of what we see in the development so far. And I would hope that in the discussion later on we can touch upon this. Now it's the end of the presentation, so we have something like half an hour for the Q&A. I would like to ask all the participants that are privileged enough to have a camera to turn it on, to keep yourselves muted until the question is addressed to any of you. And I see Paul and he joining in slowly, so I will jump right away. I will use the magical tool of Slido. The first question is on inertia and how do we ensure the inertia of the energy system. And if I was observing well enough, there is a couple of questions later on synthetic inertia and the role of this. Maybe I will address the question to Willem if you want to answer it, knowing that tomorrow we have a 2-hour webinar in the morning on innovation and the new tools that we need in order to address this issue. So maybe we shouldn't extend too much on this question, but invite people for tomorrow's webinar where this thing can be more detailed. But Willem, do you want to say a word on this?
Yes, I can say some words. So I think it's very important that all players will play a role and take some responsibility on this point. Of course, if we would like to have full renewable systems, then everybody has to do something. And grid farming control is one of the issues we can take. So, and there are some studies already available. There is also some ideas also on deployment. But in general, there is some open issues anyway. But I think this is a good way to go forward. And there's a good opportunity to achieve this.
Thank you very much, Willem. By the way, if any of the other panelists want to interfere in one of the questions, then you can just raise your hands and I'll try to see you. The second question that seems to be popular is on the hybrid, or whatever hybrid we mean, plans of combining offshore wind farm with interconnector capacity. I think both Anje and Gilles explained it quite a lot, but here the question becomes a bit more detailed. Could that work? Does wind or interconnector get priority? So how do you prioritize the flows? And is there a way to, is there a possibility that we need to curtail wind if the interconnector is very profitable? So I know that you guys analyzed it too much. I will give the floor first to Anje and then to Gilles.
Yes, I answered already in written. So yes, it is possible. As it was already mentioned, we already have built a first example. It will work. And who gets priority? It will always be the one offering the cheapest energy, which, and offshore wind is at the low end of the merit order curve. So it will in most cases be dispatched. Risk for curtailment is in exceptional cases, as also for other generation types. If there's a problem with transmission capacity, if there's a failure, so then there's also risk for curtailment, but that's also the case for other. And will curtail when profitable? No, also the market will dispatch which energy is transported. And does the varying capacity work? Yes, it does. It does already onshore, so there's no reason why it should not work offshore.
Thank you. Gilles?
I agree with everything that Antje has said. Yes, the output from the hybrid offshore wind farm could be squeezed out by the interconnector. Yes, there is a risk of curtailment, which is why it is so important that we offer a revenue perspective to those utilities and wind farm developers that are thinking of investing in hybrid offshore wind farms. As things currently stand, they look at the regulation, they look at the prospect of curtailment, and they don't see a business case for building these hybrid offshore wind farms. If we would have a model of standalone bidding zones and there was a redistribution of congestion revenues, then you might have a viable business case. You might therefore have investments, and hybrid offshore wind farms might therefore happen. But without it, they won't.
Thank you. Okay, I will move on. I will give priority to the questions of the audience instead of my own, because there are many raised. We're talking about the necessity of TSO-DSO cooperation. There is a feeling that something is hampering it. And the question is, what is the major barrier? So the question, I will address it to Paul and then to Gerald. And maybe, Gerald, you can extend more in the collaboration between multiple sectors and not just the DSO-TSO interfaces. So, Paul?
Well, we are just, if you want, as DSO getting into the business of collaboration more in a more institutional way at European level with TSOs. There's a couple of well-established processes. Let me maybe give you an example of the 10-year network development plan. That's now, how old is it? 10 years old as a process, and it came about with, it started as required by the third liberalization package as a TSO product. So we are coming in here now, so to speak, yeah, from the in a later stage. And you have in this process, of course, you have established this process as TSOs, and now we have to try to find out what is the added value and create win-win situations out of that, rather than you know, being in a non-level playing field in this process. So I think this is the trick. It's maybe not hampering, but it's basically a difference of sequence. These processes have been developed not at the same speed. They have been started in one way, and now they are amended to include other stakeholders. And we need to find a way of collaboration in this context.
Thank you, Paul. Gerald?
I already said a few words about the multi-sector planning support. And our next step, which is not fully decided with ENTSO-E, but which is inevitable, is to contact more stakeholders, especially for the scenario building, to get into closer understanding, closer contact. For example, we had lately a discussion with the industry, and it was very interesting to hear what the requirements of the chemical industry are, because they want to decarbonize. It's a very important factor for their future business to have CO2-free energy, but they do not have a clear view of what we can offer. And I think to jointly learn from what they need, what we can provide, this is going to be the next big thing. And the first step we will do in scenario building.
Thank you very much. Then I do have another interesting question on the, sorry, because the order is changing a lot, so I will do it from memory. It was about, there it is. Large amount of offshore wind imply relevant grid reinforcements to the transmission grid. including interconnection? Do you find it reasonable, the advent of advanced grid development like supergrids with nodes in the middle of seas and so on? I think, again, so I have Gerald raising a hand, but I think I will leave it open to all of you because I think all of you may have something to say, Willem, Antje, and Gilles. So Gerald, go first.
Thank you, Dimitri. First of all, I think what is implied here is very important. It is not sufficient to bring the energy to the land, but it's important to bring it to the load centers, and that's where the real challenge is. That means for each country, several hundred kilometers of power transmission onshore. And there we have to see how we can supply load. For example, in Germany, we have the coal phase out, and most states have a very high interest to have the relevant energy supplied by electricity. But in addition, I think that's where sector coupling and electrolyzers come into play, especially as the more the wind generation onshore, offshore at the coast increases, then we also need electrolyzers. And so I think the combined planning of electrolyzers, of using old refurbished methane pipelines, maybe moving some customers that need energy to that, all those things have to go together.
Thank you. Willem, would you like to add something?
Yes, I could add something to that. I think in addition to that, we also need intelligent solutions, grid solutions for electrical system design. So multi-terminal and also multi-vendor solutions will play a dominant role to achieve this. I think I could add to that.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to complement what has been said? Yes, Gilles.
Thank you, Dimitrios. You have to reinforce onshore grids as well as building out the offshore grids. Interconnectors, yes, they will play a key role. We may see that some of the new planned interconnectors already are not big enough. Let's take Ireland, for example. The new government has a coalition agreement which says they will build 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and beyond that, they would like to develop up to 30 gigawatts of floating offshore wind off their west and south coasts for export to the continental electricity market, 30 gigawatts. Celtic Interconnector is a fantastic project, but it's only 700 megawatts.
Thank you. Okay, I keep fishing on the questions. I will stay a little bit more on the offshore so that we don't get going back and forth. There was a question that caught my eye on the need to study forward markets when we look at the design, the market design. I think this is addressed to Gilles and Antje, and again, it's open to all of you. But Gilles, do you want to react?
I'll let Antje go first on this.
Okay, that would work for me.
Yeah, so I'm a semi-market expert, I would say. So yes, I would think this is maybe something our market committee is going to look into. It's always in the phase now that everything is new, and we get this huge remake of the production portfolio. It's always good to assess if all the rules are in place and if everything is compatible with a new clean energy package. So yeah, I would agree that might make sense to look into this as well. So, but I don't have an answer what might come out of it.
Could I add something?
Sure.
Long-term power purchase agreements are going to play an important role in the offshore wind electricity market. Most PPAs in wind so far have been with onshore wind farms, and they're usually a duration of 10, 15, or in some cases even 20 years. We now have our first offshore wind PPAs. In fact, Kriegers Flak is supported in part by PPAs with Novozymes and Novo Nordisk as the off-takers. a lot of very large industrial consumers of electricity are looking at offshore wind farms and wondering whether they could provide the source of electricity either for their direct electrification of their processes or the indirect electrification via renewable hydrogen. I'm talking very large industrial consumers of electricity here, and there are many conversations ongoing. So this will be a significant underpinning of the economics around all forms of offshore wind, not just the hybrid projects.
Thank you. I don't see any hands raised, so I will go on fishing the relevant questions. There is one that was added later from a colleague, Thomas Mahoney Airgrid. Should offshore development be plan-led or developer-led? I think ENTSO-E's position is clear. Maybe Antje, you can start on this one again, and then Jill. So I repeat the question, should offshore development be plan-led or developer-led? And Gerald, if you want to jump in, of course.
I think it's now what's needed is a collaboration, which, for example, already exists in the Northern Seas between governments knowing a lot about maritime spatial planning and us knowing a lot about grid planning. And here a collaboration, a closer collaboration is beneficial, I think, to move into the right direction. So yeah, and there the TSOs are the obvious partners, as we do this already onshore with the holistic view about across time, space, and sectors. And this is our advantage compared to offshore developers who are very good in installing the offshore wind farms. But yeah, so I think the infrastructure should be left to TSOs.
It should be led by neither the developers nor by the TSOs. It should be led by consumers. They are the people who want the electricity and who pay for it. And it should be led by governments because they are the people who want to decarbonize the electricity supply, as do consumers, of course. Now, that was a perhaps pedantic answer to the wording of the question. Of course, in practice, it's going to be the TSOs, the developers of the offshore wind farms, and the governments working together who are going to have to manage the build out of the grid and of the offshore wind farms, and together are going to have to take the decisions on where the hybrid offshore wind farms go and how they are connected to the energy system.
Thank you. Gerald?
I think in this regard, speed is key. I think we have to be fast. And even though the sea looks very large, we see that space is very limited, especially, for example, the gates to actually go to Germany to reach the coast. There are very few gates and they have to be coordinated. And I think to have a speedy process, to use the rare resources best, you need the strong collaboration that Charles just mentioned, because no one can do it alone. We have to do it together because of the speed needed.
Thank you very much. Okay, maybe I can switch again gear. There was a question referring to the need for investments, both at the DSO and the TSO level. The question identifies that even in rich countries, these investments are not picking up on the pace they should. And the question is why? So I will address it first to Paul and then to Gerald. So why the investments, both at distribution and transmission level, are not ramping up the way they should?
Well, I think if I can start, it's probably again a whole panorama of bottlenecks here, starting from permitting problems, starting from public acceptance problems that at the TSO side, many of you are very familiar with as well. We have very low interest rates at these times, so this is maybe not a problem for Northern and Western Europe, but still in some countries it's a problem of bankability and regulatory frameworks at national level that that hamper DSOs from financing large new investment projects. It's about a cost-saving approach that many regulators are still imposing there rather than a forward-looking approach. And basically all the investments that are going on there are only about replacing equipment that is at the end of the life cycle, and not looking forward to facilitating renewables integration or uptake of large amounts of electric vehicles in their grids and corresponding grid reinforcements there. So that is maybe already some reasons here to outline where the bottlenecks are, at least at DSO level.
Oh, okay, 3 points. First, investments are ramping up. I can say for Amprion that we are doing now in 1 year what we used to do in 5 years in the last decade. So investments are ramping up. Still, they are too slow. And one aspect is permits. And here we need to better explain what the power lines are for, what the investments are for, and how do the whole system work together so that people at the end understand the projects and maybe not support them, but at least let them being built. And the third is going to be costs and the very, very high investment in the future. And I don't think we have a forward-looking regulatory scheme. And so far, the costs are relatively low compared to what we are going to see in the next decade, especially with offshore grids and more grids onshore. And from my perspective, the regulatory regime has to be adapted in that regard as well, that we have a more forward-looking regulatory concept.
Thank you, Gerald. I will move on to the other question, and probably we will stay on the investment issue. There is a question for Gilles. Why ask for new rules on use of the congestion revenues? If you could elaborate a little bit more on this statement you did in your presentation, and maybe later the reaction from Ange or Gerald as well.
The wind industry is only asking for this because there is a consensus that hybrid offshore wind farms make sense. They save money, they save time, they improve energy markets and energy flows, and they also help to ease the problems with the reinforcement of onshore grids. So there's a consensus we should do hybrid offshore wind farms. You therefore ask the question, okay, how? Hybrid offshore wind farms are going to come under Article 16 of the electricity regulation. Fact. Yeah? So what do you do about that? Well, first thing you do is probably standalone bidding zones. Okay, then what's the revenue base for the offshore wind farms? They don't have one. And if there is no revenue perspective, the utilities, the wind farm developers won't build them. So hybrid offshore wind farms won't happen, but society wants them to happen. Therefore, you've got to find a solution. And Anja said it herself, it's the conclusion of the ENTSO-E analysis, that there needs to be some sort of other new compensation for these hybrid offshore wind farms, otherwise they will not happen.
Thank you. Ange?
Maybe adding on this, yeah, as ENTSO-E, we prefer clear rules and transparency, and so yeah, the outcome of our investigations was so far offshore bidding zone offers the best transparency, as it reflects yeah, flows and congestions very good. Yeah, and with respect to use of congestion revenues, I think this is one of the topics where we wanted to dive a bit deeper, because this is against the law. So this must not be used to be redistributed. However, there might be other options to for subsidies or something to compensate the offshore wind farms for this missing income compared to radially connected wind farms. So this has to be investigated, and I think market committee colleagues have started to look into this. So what's important is to use the rules which exist and which also facilitate hybrid projects, but some extra income is needed, and transparency should also not be violated. So that's we have to think about scalability. So maybe first we think about one Kriegers Flak, one Bornholm, one IJmuiden Bear project, but it will be. We have to keep in mind that things will grow and it will expand, and so we have to think about scalability of solutions and still wanting transparency. What is market income? What is additional subsidies, so that society, European society, pays not too much, but so much what is needed, and not any extra money. So we have to have this perspective in mind.
It's worth just reminding ourselves that if Article 16 did not apply to hybrid offshore wind farms, this problem would go away.
Yep. That's a good ending to this discussion, unless somebody wants to chip in. Nope. Okay, I can move on to the next one. Still on the domain of offshore, I think this is where it brings them together a little bit, which is kind of the intention today. There is a question from Christian Sevdari from DTU that I will address mostly to Gerald, but again, it's open to all. More wind farms does not always mean more production. Curtailment seems to become a huge problem in the North Europe, especially Germany. Will the energy islands be a reasonable solution to tackle curtailment by coupling different sectors? Gerald?
First of all, curtailment that is based on connecting projects not being in time, or onshore projects not being in time, is only a problem for some time. But if you look in the longer run, then you have to build electricity lines to the load centers so you can supply the load centers, and electricity lines to interconnection lines so you can have a distribution of the energy across Europe. But wherever it doesn't make sense to build more lines because they're not used efficiently anymore, then it makes a lot of sense to go into electrolyzers and into sector coupling, or into heat and all those different, or into chemical plants close to the infeed areas. So we have to think about the sector integration there. So for projects where we just see a little time lag because projects are delayed, I don't think this is an option. On the long term, yes, we have to plan it together. That is what the multi-sectorial planning support is all about.
Paul? Yes. Paul, you raise your hand.
I would like to add also flexibility solutions to this. To answer the question, flexibility solutions in many countries, it's still in pilot projects and pilot phases. But we have the UK, for example, where this is already a rolled out market option. So we're looking at demand side response. We're looking at various players at distribution system level that can play a role and alleviate congestions and save money by not letting these curtailments happen. So I really expect this market form to be rolled out further all over Europe with large amounts of renewables.
Thank you very much. I think I do have the time for one more question that I will address it to all of you, and I would ask from the perspective of what you have presented today, maybe you will find it difficult to do, but let's try. There was a question that was addressed to Antonio from the Commission, and it is about job creation and where this is based upon. So maybe I can ask each one of you a short word, a kind of a concluding remark, focusing on that, on job creation. And I will start from how I see my screen. So I will start from Gilles. Gilles? must unmute yourself. You must unmute yourself.
I'm very sorry. Many apologies. There are 77,000 people in Europe today who work in offshore wind. It's 300,000 people in total in wind, and 1/4 are in offshore as opposed to onshore wind. If member states deliver on their national energy and climate plans, then we will have significantly more than 300,000 people working in wind by 2030, and a very large number working in offshore wind, at least around 150,000, possibly more.
Thank you. Paul? Paul?
Just unmuting myself, sorry.
Yeah.
Job creation, I will not now refer to any figures of how many jobs can be lost, how many jobs can be gained by this or that factor or by this or that uptake. Just to say that I see this as a massive opportunity. We see this as Euroelectric as really a massive opportunity, decarbonization and electrification going forward. This goes hand in hand with some meta trends on digitalization. This goes hand in hand with some meta trends about decentralization, which will provide for totally different perspectives and job opportunities across our society. You can probably organize a webinar on all of these meta trends and figure out what it really means on a societal level and on employment in general. But I do see here a lot more involvement of people, of consumers, and a lot more employment opportunities in different innovative areas. It's maybe one thing worthwhile noting out about industrial policy. Europe does not have an industrial policy with regards to this meta trend of electrification. Other players outside of Europe do have that. When you look at where most of our resources for batteries, for example, are coming from. I think the Commission has here some very early ideas about a battery strategy, for example, but it's not comparable to be called an industrial policy. So this is maybe something that would be worth looking at from this angle as well, to ensure that that jobs are created in a meaningful manner here in Europe.
Thank you, Paul. Anje, one word.
Oh, I don't have figures as well, but maybe I can increase your appetite for the upcoming TYNDP publication end of this month, where I assume there was a chapter or something on job creation related to infrastructure as well.
Very well indeed. So in a couple of weeks' time, we may have more. But Gerald?
I do have figures. Amprion used to have less than 1,000 employees 10 years ago. Now we have more than 2,000, and this is mainly based on projects for the energy transition. In addition, we estimate that we have 4,000 people working on our construction sites for every billion of euros spent, and we have 15 billion euros on our long-term plan for the next 10 years. So that means 15 times 4,000 people working, and we will even increase that planning in the upcoming year. And in addition, we see that companies who rely on green energy are becoming more competitive, and thus they secure the jobs. So I can say there's a lot of job creation due to the energy transition and due to connecting offshore wind to the load centers.
Thank you, Gerald. Willem, from the innovation point of view?
Yeah, from an innovation point of view, from tenant point of view, it's the same situation that Amprion and Gerald has told us. So from an innovation point of view, I think innovation will create also further jobs. I think that's really important to be in all sections more innovative, and this, of course, will also create new jobs.
Dimitri, unmute yourself.
Indeed. So I have less than 4 minutes that I was giving myself for wrapping it up. Instead of wrapping it up, I will just refer you For tomorrow morning, there is the 5th webinar in our series focusing more on innovation. So I would urge you to participate. It's going to be extremely interesting. And in the afternoon, a wrap up of all the 5 webinars that we have offered. It will be from 2 to 4, if I'm not mistaken. So I urge you as well to register. I don't have much time other than to thank my colleagues from ENTSO-E, Willem, Gerald, Anhe, for not only presenting the work, but being the heart and brain behind the work that you have seen so far. So thank you so much. This complements our System Vision 2030. It's part of our System Vision 2030, which is part of a bigger team that created these webinars. I would very much thank Gilles, Paul, and Antonio for contributing to our webinar. It's always very interesting to help us see things from a different perspective, and I think you have been much more impactful than you may even think. So thank you so much for your contributions. And I shouldn't close other by thanking also the amazing team that made this thing real. The team that organized the webinar in the ENTSO-E Secretariat. So you guys, you know who you are. So thank you immensely for putting this thing together. And with that being said, I will thank all the people that participated. You asked your questions. I hope these last 2 hours were well spent for you. Thank you so much. We give rendezvous for tomorrow's webinar. So thank you all, and I think we can close the webinar now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.